Hello, my friends. It is I, Rob, once again in the lair of OmnusI, here to deliver my State of the Lair address for May 25th, 2017. The game, Werewolves of the Caribbean. All players in attendance tonight, which is good, because there was plenty to do. First of all, the party when we last left them were just coming out of breaking into a sacred site of the Mokole, where reptilians, where crocodiles. And interesting thing about them, number one, when they transform into their war form, similar to a werewolf in the Krynos form, the typical werewolf, they can look like draconian or dinosaur-like appearances, and they can actually vary. So they can be almost as frightening, if not more so, than the Guru, the werewolves. So the party had broken into their sacred place, a village with the Mokole and their kinfolk. Not usually a good thing to do. And they tried to sneak out of the village before they were discovered and ended up killing one of the kinfolk who were served as a guard. So they ran like their tails were on fire. Grace, the GM NPC, botched in her attempt to run away and instead fell back on her camouflage gift to get out of sight, out of mind. The rest of the party bolted, and for the most part they were trying to make it towards the large river that they had seen when they were on the moon bridge coming down into the cairn, which was the Mississippi River, little as they knew of it. So they were running, and unfortunately for them, Nikolai had fallen and the Mokole had caught up, and with him was the pack leader Aiden of the Silver Fangs. So he decided he was going to turn, he was going to do everything he could to keep his pack together. So he bore down on the Mokole. Two Mokole burst into the clearing, they were the first, and he went to tangle with one that kind of looked like a velociraptor in its Krynos form. It slashed at him, or he slashed at it, found out that these things were rather tough in their Krynos form. As a sept, theirs was a cairn of endurance, so they all had a little bit of extra resilience. So the Gru were having a hard time hurting them, and at the same time, Peter, who's the warder of men, went off first. He was going to try to scout the best way to the river, and he heard that there was a fight, so he turned around and snuck back. At the same time, Nathan, who was absent at the tail end of the adventure, the prior session, well, his player was there, so I inserted him. He fell off the moon bridge, and he came into, by random roll, he came into the scene next to Vlad, the Shadow Lord, who had decided he really didn't profit anything by fighting these Mokole, so he decided the Silverfang leader is so good, he can handle it. So he was perfectly content to keep some distance. Nathan was like, I hear a fight. Nathan is a Get of Fenris, but he's rather mild for the Get of Fenris. He's a bit more laid back because of the nature of the player, as much as anything. So he goes to investigate the sound of battle. Now, through the fight, Aiden ends up killing one of the Mokole. Actually, no, Aiden did not kill a Mokole. Aiden did injure Mokole a little bit, but unfortunately for the Mokole, it saw Peter, who was kind of spying on the engagement to see how it was going, and he bull rushed at Nikolai, the young Theurge of the group, of the Children of Gaia, and splashed on top of him, and then lunged out to bite at Peter. And he got a really good bite on him and wounded him badly, just shy of crippling him. At the same time, he kind of exposed his belly to Nikolai, who was badly hurt when he splashed on top of him. But when he spent a point of willpower to suppress the effect of his injury, to ignore his wounds, he bit at the unprotected underbelly of the Mokole, biting him someplace sensitive that he wasn't armored. And the Mokole was a menace and had this issue where he was... combat got him excited. So Peter made his attack roll of his life, did plenty of damage. I didn't roll anything for soak, and he just completely ripped out the undercarriage of the Mokole. And so he died. That one died. The other one proved to be a difficult challenge. It tried jumping in and attacking Aiden. That didn't work so well. But the problem was that round ended after that. A lot can happen in a round when you've got rage, and both of these parties had rage. So they were able to send flurries of blows going. Next round. Well, the entire encampment was coming after them, so I rolled, and sure enough, two more Mokole appeared. So now it was 3 against 1. Because Nikolai was not in any real good shape to try to fight back. He was crippled from bludgeoning damage from being splashed. Peter was badly injured from the bite. And at this point, Nathan hadn't entered the fray yet, nor had Vlad. So the Mokole, one of them was the leader of the group, Theurge. I rolled to see which of the Mokole showed up. And this Mokole had an ability where he called upon the various woodland spirits to rise up, and it caused all the roots of the nearby mangrove trees to rise up and and wrap up the Guru. And it worked rather well. Peter was bound at the waist, Aiden was bound to the waist. Nikolai was wrapped up in a little cradle of roots, so he couldn't get away. Well, Nikolai decided he was going to go to the Umbra, so he popped over to the Umbra, because he can do that. He's got a natural channel, which means he can slide over quite easily. All he had to do was get a look at something vaguely reflective, and he was able to escape into the spirit world, where he found 2 more Mokole who were on the other side waiting for him. And they basically took him prisoner. Peter came through and ripped away many of the roots that were holding Aiden in place. But the Mokole with the staff, who was the leader, pointed it at Aiden and said, "Surrender or your people are going to start dying." Now, he didn't speak a language that Aiden understood, but Aiden has enough empathy that he kind of got the meaning of what he said. This Mokole is not quite as interested in killing them, although he was very angry. But at the same time, he realized that maybe there was some misunderstanding that was going on. Because of his long memory, he remembers times when werewolves, doing their daring do, accidentally offended members of the Mokole, some of his ancestors, and decided that he was going to give them the benefit of the doubt this time to see what their story was. So they agreed to surrender, except for Vlad. Vlad decided he was going to go, and during the fight they had heard some flute music, which sounded like Grace and her harmony flute was trying to get out of trouble. Vlad decided everything was settled over in that fight, so he went to go and see what happened to Grace. The flute music cut off abruptly. When Vlad showed up, he found out that Grace was surrounded by Mokole. One of them had her flute, and she looked like she had been captured. So he decides that he is going to do what he can to free her. So he allows one of his ancestor spirits to ride him for a while. She's a tricky, sadistic woman from a long time ago, but she was rather clever for her age and what she was ever given credit for. She was actually a tinker of her own and something of an inventress. So, you want to come up? Come on. Magic wants to join us tonight. So, she took over and gave him the ability, teaching him some things about making bombs using his explosive charges for his muskets. And he decided to make several bombs, which turned out to be nice little concussion bombs. A lot of flash, a lot of noise, enough to scare the superstitious Mokole that were holding... This isn't going to go well. The superstitious Mokole that were holding Grace captive. And it worked fairly well. He decided to bomb them. One of them, two of the three that were around Grace, fox frenzied. They were so scared. The one that wasn't, he decided, I'm going to kill them. So he jumps, whiff, no damage. Just lets the Mokole know he's there. The Mokole turns around and wham! Takes him down. Knocks him completely out. One punch, Shadow Lord on the ground. So he gets taken prisoner. Gave him credit. He came up with an idea, just the dice were not with him. To a laughable degree, he did like 3 points of damage, which the Mokole easily soaked. So, all the party is together again, and a little the worse for wear, but they are in... What? Okay, you can go down. So, they're a bit the worse for wear, but... Here's some of that. Okay. So they're a bit the worse for wear, but they're together again. Well, the leader of the Mokole comes forward and asks what they're doing there. And they say, well, we're on a quest. We're trying to defeat some evil, and we're trying to regain something that's been stolen. And the Mokole said, well, how interesting. We're also plagued by, effectively, she showed them some pictograms which let them realize they had a common enemy. And the Mokole said, if you pledge that you're going to unendingly fight this evil, we can let you go. And they're like, well, we're going to go and kill them anyhow, so yeah, why not? So they got bound together with some rites. I worked fairly hard at making the Mokole's spiritual presence seem different from what they were used to in their limited experience with the Guru already. And it seemed to work out pretty well. They found out in the Umbra they have this vine that goes from their chest and connects all of them, their umbral presence. And they have a spirit that's following them around and checking up on them. So the Mokole let them go after eating them and healing them enough to carry on. And do not mess with the camera. So they go off. And for the most part, it's a fairly straightforward journey. They run a lot. They bypass a couple of annoying things that get in their way. But for the most part, it's fairly uneventful of a trip. Now, they eventually find themselves at this large clearing with a hilltop in the middle and this huge 45-foot diameter tree in the middle. Its boughs are all limber like a willow, and it's unlike any other tree around. And all of their spirits and all of their inclinations are saying, that's where the dagger is that we're after, and that's where the evil is that we're bound to attack. So the problem is, there's a ton of crows and ravens all over it. Blackbirds. They're not ornithologists or anything, so there's a lot of blackbirds around. And they're trying to think of how to get there without being seen by them. This was apparently very important to them not to be seen. So Nikolai decides, I'm going to go through the Umbra. And he goes over and he looks, and the tree looks nasty. It's got a big mouth in the middle of it. It's got mean-looking eyes. The branches are whipping around like they're just looking for something to grab, and there's tons and tons of spirit crows all over this thing. And he freaks out. So they talk to each other, and they're like, well, if we take the bombs from Vlad, we dedicate them as talismans so they'll exist in the Umbra, and if Nikolai carries them over with a fuse and drops them on the crows, because Nikolai can transform himself into one of the prime spirit patrons of the Gru tribes. He can transform himself into a Pegasus and go flying off and drop these bombs on the crows. Or no, he turns into Falcon this time, clutching it in his claws. Many Monty Python jokes were made. So they go flying off, or he goes flying off, and he summons a fire elemental. And the fire elemental, he gets a really good one. He summons really a powerful fire elemental. Gets everything he wants out of that spell. So there's the fire elemental. He's like, okay, get into this fuse, and you can start burning it, and I'm going to drop this, and you're going to make this burn up. And the fire elemental's like, yes, excellent, burning, good. That was a little powerful for that little bit of match. So he's flying along and doesn't really judge how fast that elemental is going to realize that the gunpowder that's inside of this gourd is even more fun to burn. That happens as he's flying. So, have you ever seen what happens when a large bird of prey gets hit with an explosive? It's not pretty. Well, fortunately, Nikolai had a lot of gnosis, so he absorbed the blow fairly well. He got knocked flat and knocked out completely from the fall once he hit. And, yeah, it was nice, and I said the fall was an impact, so it was bashing damage, so it wasn't going to kill him. But no, he's unconscious in the Umbra. The crows flew off because it's a big bang. They didn't like that. And when the group on the other side saw a lot of the crows break off because they were the spirit eyes and ears, and they flew away because the spirits did, they're like, it's time to run. Aiden's like, oh, I'm going to look over the Umbra, see what happened. And he's like, oh, Peter went down, or Nikolai went down. That sucks. So he went over to try to get Nikolai back. The rest of them charged up to the tree, and nothing happened. The tree didn't do anything. On the other hand, Aiden goes over to the other side, and he's like, I don't have any means of bringing Nikolai back. I guess I can try to push the bits back together so he's healing again, but there's only so much I can do. So he decides, well, okay, I can't go back to the other world with him. I don't have a gift that'll allow me to snatch him back across the gauntlet. So I guess we're going to have to do what we're going to do here. So he tries to ask the spirit familiar of Nikolai, who is being forever and now portrayed as Squidward. He's an elementally water octopus-shaped spirit who kind of somewhat looks out for Nikolai's interests. And he's like, well, what should we do? And the spirit's like, and Aiden's like, you want to fight me? And starts pointing over at the tree. So he's like, oh, okay, let's go. And Squidward, when he's not out and doing anything, pops into Nikolai's ear. It's kind of disconcerting to look at. So they go over to the tree, and the tree animates and attacks them. It tries to wrap them up. Aiden fights like a champion. It can't grab him at all. However, it's got plenty of boughs, and it reaches over and it grabs Nikolai. And while Aiden tries to stop it, it pops Nikolai right into its maw. And it just, he's gone. Aiden's like, well, that's crap. Okay, it doesn't sound like it chewed him or anything. The teeth didn't come down on him, and there's no blood or anything. So he decided he was going to jump into the mouth himself. Well, on the other side, the rest of them were just kind of, there's nothing going on here. The ground is a little bumpy, but nothing else. So Vlad decides he's going to go around the tree. On the back side of the tree, away from where the mouth is in the spirit world, there were some runes carved in the back. I was being funny when he tried to read them. I'm like, well, it's Latin. It means these are explosive runes. In reality, what it was a trigger for people going from the physical world to pass into the Raven Queen's Demesne. And when he read it, the runes activated and the tree just kind of gobbled him up. When the others walked around, where the heck Vlad went to, they did a horrible job of tracking. And they found out that he didn't really leave a lot of footprints. They found out that there were bones all around the tree. They looked like infants' bones everywhere. Eventually they got to the rune and they got sucked in. So they all ended up going into the tree, which they were supposed to do. So they appeared on in an island in front of a precipice, rising up. All around them was storm-racked seas. The sky was red. There's a big red moon. And at the top, carved out of the precipice, was a tower. So they scaled up a few rolls. Grace proved very poor at climbing. She is not an athletic guru. But they got to the top. And at the top there was a portcullis covering the door to go in. So they forced it up. I mean, brute strength. They've got strength in spades in this group. So they forced the portcullis up. They went inside. They found out that the portcullis was alive and it created barbs which kind of cut up people's hands when they were lifting it. And interestingly enough, Peter's player decided he was going to go out of his way and say he was observing how their hands were healing since they were in cryonose form. These were lethal cuts, not aggravated. So that he was watching and observing how their blood and their tissues all knit back together again, which was well thought. Because he's justifying increasing his medicine skill, because he wants to eventually get Mother's Touch and be effective with it. So they go inside, and they see that there's a way up and a way down in the main room, and there's this large raven symbol on the floor. They find, using their gifts, that the dagger is below. So they eschew going up, and they descend down the spiral staircase going down, and find themselves in a room. There are 3 doors. One of them has a sunny sky and a peaceful meadow scene and a raven flying across it. Directly in front of them there was a large image of the moon with a raven flying across it. And on the left-hand side there was a storm-racked sky with a raven across that. And there was a door next to each one of them. In the center of the room there was a brazier which was giving off a smell of dung and incense. Wasn't unpleasant thoroughly, but it wasn't great. And there were 2 very large, powerful-looking Coraxes, the were-ravens, with their raven heads, but wrapped around their wrists were long, corded whips with nuggets of silver interwoven into the whips. They looked like something werewolves didn't want to tangle with. And so they were a little nervous about that. But they thought, okay, well, let's all of us go, let's split up and open up the doors at the same time. Interesting idea. Aiden said, and he was going to intentionally, he put up Luna's armor, and he said, I'm going to go across by the ravens, and I'm just going to look at that brazier. Inside, he saw a lump of gold in the middle of the coals. He thrust his hand in, picked it up. It was cool to the touch, and it turns out that it's a compass. It's 2 seashells hinged, that when you open it up, the bottom half is completely full of quicksilver, and there's a needle of onyx that was moving around and eventually stabilized. And when he looked around, it was pointing towards the door that had the sunny pastoral scene. So they happily went over there and went in. Inside there was a meadow. It led to a magical realm outside of the tower itself. And there was a meadow. They went across, and there's a primitive-looking hut. And as they approached, the door opened, and this old, wizened man who looked a bit like a wizard, leaning on a staff, came out. And they were warned by the Korax Guardians, that no matter which door they chose, there would be a challenge, and they would get to choose the nature of the challenge behind each door. It would either be a test of combat, it would be a test of wits, or it would be a test of bravery. So the group goes over to the old man. The old man says, well, which test shall it be? Aiden, being the leader, said, I call for a test of wits. And I was pretty happy about that. The test of wits is one that I've done before for parties. I really enjoy doing it. It's to test and see how well they've absorbed what's happened prior. And so basically I gave them all a quiz on detailed of what happened in the past. One got asked, what's the full name of Aiden's father? They stated his house, and they needed to know his name was Roland Whitepaw. I'm happy to say, I'm not going to go over the details of everything, there was only one error. Otherwise, the group got pretty well. They were allowed to make an empathy roll, a very, very difficult, target number of 10, to offer up a hint to the person who was asked the question. So, for the most, I'm not going to get into anybody's individual test. It was something related to them, something that I knew they'd had exposure to see if they remember details. And for the most part, everybody did well. If the players watch this video and you wish to boast about the feat of remembering what you did, feel free to put that out. But because one person didn't, if you feel like you felt a little bad about that, I'm not going to go down the line and say what everybody did. But it was good. They did well. So the only downside was that Nathan's player wasn't there, and I kind of wish he had been, because it'd be interesting to see what he remembered and how much he was sleeping in those early sessions. So, but all the same, the group did well. So they got out. And then they went, they were acknowledged that they had passed that test. So then they went to the next one that the needle pointed to, which was the moon. So they go in to the door, and they find themselves in a large church, almost a cathedral. All the pews are moved out of it. This is very much along the lines of a Catholic cathedral. All the pews are moved out of it. There are large statues of angels in different poses, prayer and like offering a blessing or benediction with hands up and so on. So they go in and they're like, okay, and they're asked what challenge they would like. And this time they do choose the challenge of bravery. Okay, so they found their abilities lessening. With the moon coming through the stained glass, they felt their rage draining, and they were unable to maintain any form but their Hamid form. They got shunted back into their frail human selves. Well, relatively frail. I mean, Aiden's still a beast, and Nathan is still, the human fire plug. He's huge. But the rest of the group is very, very mortal. So, and that discouraged them a little bit, and they found out they couldn't use their gifts. And then all of a sudden the door started to get pounded upon. And the door, the gate going back to the tower was gone. So the door, thud, thud, thud. And it's like, well, I'm just going to go and open it. And all of a sudden the door gets broken through, and a undead, sickly gray hand goes through the door. And the group kind of looks at each other and goes, oh, are we in a zombie apocalypse in Werewolf, but we can't be werewolves? And that's where we ended. I love my cliffhanger endings. So that's how, as far as that went. The next session, they get to take the test of bravery. Again, facing down a zombie apocalypse in a church without their werewolf powers. Should be interesting. So I hope you enjoyed this. Again, my State of the Dungeon. This week, Dungeons & Dragons again. Also, for those of you who pay attention to these things, June 17th is Free RPG Day. And if you're not interested in the RPG, if you are local to Fond du Lac, me, Rob, also known as OmnusI, will be running a game of the retro clone Swords and Wizardry Light, which is similar to Dungeons & Dragons. If you've ever played any iteration of Dungeons & Dragons, it'll be very familiar. Back in the old school day, where you had 0 hit points, you're dead, and your characters can fit on a 3x5 card. So I'm going to be running a dungeon, kind of a dungeon crawl. Not a true dungeon crawl, but kind of a dungeon crawl. At Chimera Hobbies on Main Street in Fond du Lac. I will be setting up, maybe ready to run at 10 o'clock in the morning. And our free RPG day is going to go, I think they close at 6 or so. So I will be there. No, probably later. But anyhow, I'll be there 10 o'clock on, I will be running it as OmnusI. So, I'll have the turtleneck and the hat. And should be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be fun. I'm going to create the adventure and everything. It'll be an original of mine. Swords and Wizardry Light is a delightful light rules game, so if you're going to play, bring your thinking cap as much as anything, and get ready for a wild time. So, I'm Rob, Lair of OmnusI. Thank you for joining me, and safe adventures.